Okay. Good.
Will this mean to order with the flag salute? There we go.
It's a small plate. There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so our agenda is short this evening. Does anybody have any changes they want to make to the agenda? All right, hearing no changes, we will approve the agenda and move right into reviewing the process and procedures of public school building construction projects. Sean, I'm going to hand it to you to kind of do some introductions,
Okay.
please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Very excited for these three individuals to be joining us here today. And I know at the last board meeting, we had some questions and some concerns about the bond project. And as you know, early in the project, I secured through the ESD the services of HMK to help us as just a third-party oversight for the bond project. And as I told the board last time we met, that I would be consulting with HMK about where we're at, what's going on, what the processes are, because I think there's frustrations on the part of the board. I know that there's also frustrations on the part of the contractors, CB Construction, as well as Straight Line. And I want to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure this project is successful. And that's what this is about tonight. So Nicole Davis is here as our executive secretary tonight, or board secretary, because Shirley had some other obligations tonight she couldn't attend. So just so you know that Nicole's taking minutes for us. But at this time, I would like to invite up to the table, and you probably need to bring up another chair, is David McKay from HMK, and then Jason Hayes, who is our assistant superintendent at LBL ESD, and then Frank, and I can't remember your last name, Frank, Bricker. Thank you. Who is, are you still the board chair?
No, vice chair.
Vice chair at the ESD.
Yeah.
And again, Dave is the CEO of HMK. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but you have had a 35-year career in school construction projects?
26 in school.
26 in schools.
I worked for 102 Oregon schools.
102 Oregon school districts. So his expertise on how construction projects go is really, really valuable to us. And as we were comparing notes with not only himself, but also Jason, who has been through a number of school bond projects as a school administrator and as a superintendent, and as some of his career goals. We were kind of comparing notes. We're all kind of coming up with the same conclusions. And Frank is also here because you've been through a number of bond projects also as a board member, correct?
Yeah, I was in Albany. I was on the Albany board for 25 years.
So you had a few projects you went
Yeah,
through.
three bonds totaling over $300 million.
Yeah, yeah. So I got to tell you that these gentlemen have seen it all. And they've also been frustrated with some of their projects for a time or two. And it's a normal thing to have some frustrations, but there's ways that we can work through this together to make sure that the project is successful and is the best benefit possible for the district. So I wanted to have this conversation with the board and bring these consultants in, because these guys don't have they don't have a direct interest. They have a vested interest as third party because they want to see our project be very successful, as I've talked with most all of them about this. So they have a list of questions that are in front of you that came from Christine and Linda, just kind of summarizing the questions and the frustrations that the board has been having.
Those
Phil,
are just from Linda and I, sorry.
Yes.
The
It can
other
act as a
board members
starting
may
point, so
very
that's
well
okay,
have
yeah.
Yes.
some more
So-
to come on.
feel free to join in. Feel free to add more to this list. We're here just for an open discussion. This is a great Q&A. This is an opportunity to pick the brains of some very, very experienced people in construction projects. I myself have over a dozen to my name also. And so the conclusions that we're kind of coming up with are pretty much the same. And I didn't want you to just hear from me. I want you to hear from the experts. Because these gentlemen certainly have been through a lot of different projects and a lot of different communities and different scenarios. So let's go ahead and start this. The first question that was on this is report monthly on each priority. We hear a lot about the VOC project, but not regarding the HVAC or the cafeteria. Keep in mind, the board did prioritize the projects with the bond project. Number one is the electrical upgrades. Number two is the HVAC system. Number three is the vocational center. And number four is the kitchen cafeteria, just so you guys are aware of. And so I think they're hearing a lot of movement on the vocational project, but they're not hearing a whole lot of movement on the others, even though I can tell you there is movement on the others. It's just not being reported. And sometimes to me, that's more of a communication issue. So gentlemen, could you maybe address that? Yep.
Okay, I can give you this.
No, the priorities. Priorities. First is electrical upgrade. Second is HVAC. Third is vocational center. And fourth is the kitchen cafeteria.
So one perspective, I'll just kick this off, is that I could say without knowing anything about these projects, and I appreciate the introduction. I think where we can be helpful is that we don't necessarily, though you didn't put it this way, but it's the cliche, we don't have a dog in the fight, you know? However, we all care a lot about kids everywhere. And,
Yes.
you know, these types of projects can do a lot for kids and communities. And I've seen that many times, in various things that I've done. And so I guess not knowing anything about the various aspects of these, but I'll just give you the perspective that I think is always something to pay attention to in terms of the communication. And Frank and Dave might add to this, is that the first two aren't terribly visible, or what somebody would call as, I dare I say sexy in a public board meeting, but they're just not those types of projects because they're invisible. You know, upgrading an electrical system is really important to the infrastructure of a building, especially as you have classrooms that have aged, and there's so many more. I mean, there's all kinds of technology around us and all of that, and yet it's not very exciting to talk about. So that's sort of my wondering about, why, maybe that's why it's being talked about more. I don't know. So
Yeah.
you guys have things to add about just that perspective?
So sort of that, but when I've been board chair and we sit down to come up with the agenda for a meeting, we're usually saying, well, what can we cut? Because we don't want the meeting to go till 11 o'clock. And quite often it's, well, we'll give the highlights of what's doing in the bond. In Albany, we had 20 different buildings being worked on at one time. But we have to say, okay, these are the two that people are most interested in. And so the others get short shift just because time is out there that it's hard to come up with. And some board members just aren't interested in the electrical upgrades. I'm one of them.
I would say, I think one of the most important things that is needed every month is you need a board report. You need a bond report. What Frank didn't mention is in Albany, when we had projects going in 20 different schools, we used to joke because, I have 25 projects, 20 projects. The bond report was 192
Oh,
every month.
Every
So,
month.
so he is a board member, and the rest of the board members, they could have a shortened agenda because there was an update every single month. And this is what I think is critical. Number one, you need to know what occurred in the previous month. Okay? You need to know what's going to happen in the next month. You need to know if there's any major challenges or issues that needed to be, for instance, maybe the permitting jurisdiction was delaying the permit, and you needed to take extra time to work with them to be able to work through that. So you need to know what those challenges are. There needs to be a schedule that basically tells you where you are in the construction, and there needs to be a budget update. Those to me, so description of project, schedule, budget for every single project. So in my mind, if I was looking at this, I would say you would have at least 4 project reports. And even if the kitchen cafeteria is the last project that's going to be done, there's undoubtedly something that's happening on it in this period. Maybe it's design, maybe they met with, but there is always something that can be reported. So, Frank said electrical wasn't important to him, but he had a full report that he could look at, and then he could come at the board meeting and ask questions. The other thing about that report is it can be posted to your website.
It's very transparent to the
It's very,
community.
yes. And I think we sent you one of Jason's
Yes.
from Lindbergh Lincoln.
Yes.
And that's a work in progress for me of 25 years of doing this. But that's in essence what I believe is critical. And as I read through this list, I think that if you were getting that every month, you would feel in the know about your project.
So one thing I want to point out with HMK that I've been so impressed with is that you actually have a communications department.
Yes.
Can you maybe comment a little bit about how that came about and why?
So my passion is schools. 25 years, 26 years have been on coaches. One of the things, don't take this wrong, that I've learned is schools are the very worst at calling their school. You're great at educating, but you don't do a great job, and I'm speaking generally, okay? You guys may do a super job, but you don't do a good job telling your story. And so I realized that there was a real opportunity for us to provide a service. It's all about services. Provide a service to be able to communicate your story in a project. And so the board reports is one, websites is another, social media is another. And what that has done is it's really communicated well to your community or to the communities what's happening in your projects, and then a newsletter that we either do quarterly or monthly, depending. It can be sent out via MailChimp to your patrons. But again, why? Is because we realize that it's important to communicate the great work you're doing. Your community's trusted you for $2.5 million.
It's 4.3 million.
So your community has trusted you with $4 million. That is an increase to their tax, to their property taxes. And so I think one of the best things we can do, and I'm speaking as a member, when I'm speaking with the school district, when we come, we believe we're a part of it, is communicate the great work that you're doing. And be able to communicate that, to your community.
Yeah.
So-
I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
One of the other things that we always tended to look at this bond is preparing us for the next bond.
Yes.
Because we know, we always knew that 8 to 10 years at the most, we're going to be going out for a new bond. Because we were growing and our schools are getting older. So to make sure that we communicated what we're doing now really helps 10 years from now or 8 years from now to sell the next bond. It may sound funny, but that's the way life is for in Albany anyways, that we know we're going to have another bond. So this bond is a way to show people that we can do what we say, and hopefully the next time around, they'll remember that we built Timber Ridge the way we said we were. And it's, part of the job to communicate.
I like to say this at 8:15 on election night. You got your election results. Your next bond campaigns. And it doesn't matter if it's 8 years or 10 years or 20 years. There is a memory in your community. And it's our job to communicate well and to do well with the money that was given to you. So that you set a legacy of being good stewards with bond money. So that when the next group of board members are grappling with going out for another bond, the memory in the community is they did well. And we can trust. And it doesn't matter if it's 10 years or if it's 20 years. There's a memory.
Appreciate
it.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate what you both said, because it's exactly where I was going to go, is that I look at how that sets you up to show your successes. So I was an teacher and administrator in the Albany School District for 17 years, and got to know Frank over that time, and Dave, during 2 different bonds then. And absolutely, you show your successes, you are really transparent, the community trusts you. And we went from having one $50 million bond, and it just set up 10 years later to do a $150 million bond, and it passed quite easily because of all of that history and communication. And then I'll add, and just because I'm an administrator, and you always have to add in the doomsday sort of thing, because that's how we have to think about things sometimes, is the other part that the communication does is that every month you're getting to see, here's the successes, and your community sees that. And it also gives you an opportunity, like Dave said, that you get to say, here are the challenges, because in a construction market, there are going to be challenges. We happen to be in a very challenging one right now. LBL is doing a $14 million renovation project right now. And
It started out as a 7 million.
and it started out as 7 million, and as we figured out more of the scope and what we were doing, it grew, but escalation costs, everything else that's going on is pretty huge. And so it allows you to communicate what's not going well in the moment, so the community isn't surprised if you have to change direction slightly. Because I think you all know that you make a promise in that bond language about what scope you're going to get done, and if because of budget you can't do it, well, then you need to come back to the community and say, okay, we recognize that costs have done what they've done. We need to reduce scope. We need to think about this in a different way. Maybe we're going to table something for the next bond, and a lot of times that will work. If you communicate well, you can look ahead in the next bond. We're gonna hang on to this. We're gonna look at putting that into a capital improvement plan as we save money, as we do things in the future, and or put it into the next bond. And you can actually be more successful by having a more focused scope. Not to say, I'm not prioritizing or suggesting anything that drops off this list, but just knowing the market right now and knowing what I've gone through with our project, that it's very likely that you either have 2 options: spend more money, and in the event that you don't have more money to spend, cut something. So there's the communication can help you with that too, and having that level of transparency with the community is really huge. And I look at it from the standpoint of myself, of being involved as a building administrator and as a district level administrator in the Albany School District, and being somebody who paid the taxes and convinced people to pass those bonds, it's like, hey, I think this is a good thing. This is why. And, you know, my property taxes are going to go up right along with the rest of yours. And I'm committing to this because we're going to do it well and we're going to communicate what's going on.
So I don't have the whole questions on that, but you go ahead, Deb.
So kind of touching on what you just said. So originally, when our bond come out, we had this huge, you know, this is what we're gonna do. This is what we want to do.
It always starts more pie in the sky than it does boots
Yeah,
on the
and I
ground, doesn't it?
just feel like as a board member, not that we haven't been trying to communicate with our community because we all have really, but I just feel like a constant letdown, you know, because of the expensive everything that's going on. Okay, so we went from this to this to this to this, and now we're to this, and it's like, I just feel like we have completely let our community down. And I don't know how to get them back up to here.
Yeah.
I mean, I was one of them that was very disappointed, and I'm working really hard myself to have that overall positive, you know, we're getting something, but I just.
Yeah.
I've been out for kind of a month now and I don't know really what
Yeah.
is going on, but I
So
just.
here's something I might consider with that. And as you think about the sort of psychology around these things and how people think about these things, is that sometimes it's good to just name the frustration so that people know, like, we get you.
Yeah.
You know, like to say what you say, to say, hey, look, I recognize this is happening. I don't like this. I'm right along with you not liking this, but this is the game that, you know, like
Reality.
the rules changed on us, you
Yeah.
know, to some degree. And here's the reality that we have. And then, you know, really go back to what your priorities are, and maybe not the linear sort of priorities like was outlined, you know, that here are the priorities: 1, electrical; 2, HVAC. It might not be that it's a linear set of priorities any longer. You might have to look at it as what's the spirit of what the community wanted. And you go back to the priority list and say, all right, well, we want to have something. We want to make sure that when this is all said and done, the community can still see something really tangible that was a benefit to our kids,
And
you know, and also do some of the less exciting things like upgrading electrical or plumbing or something like that. So you kind of think about the priorities in different ways, and you probably have already done that to some
I
degree.
kind
you
of feel
know?
like we have
Yeah.
with the Voc Center. I think that was something the community really wanted.
Mhm.
And I think we're trying to focus on that after we have the electrical, because you can't have anything else without the electrical.
Yeah.
And so, and then the HVAC, I mean, those are two things that have to happen.
Yep.
And so then I think, you know, moving forward with the Voc Center, I think is the eye
Yeah, so you've kind
candy
of done that some already. Yeah. Eye
yeah.
candy is a nice way of putting it. Yeah, to
Yeah.
like what's going to be exciting, because you
Yeah.
need to have that exciting thing that helps, you know, tie people in.
Yeah.
Want to continue being supportive.
So that's my take. I don't know where we are right now, but
I just would say we are in the most difficult time of my career, 47 years in construction. I've been through 6 or 7 turns. Recession in 80, 81, 82 was the worst in my life. Variable interest rate first house 15.5%. But what we have today, we've never seen before. So we have unprecedented inflation. Diesel was $2.40 a gallon in January 21. It was $5.40. So we're all feeling it, right?
yeah, it went up to $5.99 or $6.49, I think.
Yeah.
Crazy. I know I
Yeah.
drive a diesel.
Yeah. So, and then we have trade shortages. Thank you for wanting to do low tech, because there's a real need for low tech. And I applaud you for doing it. But we're retiring more journeymen than apprentices are coming in.
Mhm.
And we have supply chain issues. project that Frank and Jason and Lynn met in Lincoln. Storefront doors for 36 weeks. That's a big deal. 50 weeks.
Yeah.
Generators now 2 years. You know, it just goes on and on. So those are all real challenges we have to face. And as you were talking about, sometimes we just have to be able to express that to the community and then just try to figure out a plan to navigate through them. But those are real. And every district is facing those with every project that they're doing.
Can you move your microphone more into the middle of the table? Sorry, the people
Are
online
they having a
can't
hard
hear
time hearing
very
the
well.
online? Okay.
We'll try to speak a little bit louder too. I always feel like I'm yelling at people when I do that. But- Do you have any questions, Ryan?
I really want to know at what time in the project we get a budget.
It should start with day one.
So one of the things that I outlined was the overview template that you provided us. So, you know, what occurred previously, what happens next month, or what happened last month, what happens next month, what are things that are holding up, as well as a schedule and a budget. These are things that we don't have. These are things that we have asked for multiple times and we don't have. So living in your world, how do we direct you to get that to us?
So I'm going to start because I think that it's easier for an administrator to say this, especially I don't want at all for David to seem like he's tooting his own horn, but straight up, if you look at your second bullet point here, you mentioned budget. You also talk about a Gantt chart of work to be done. We're talking about schedule, staying on schedule. Straight up, what you need is a project manager that is your owner's representative. The construction company. So I'm just going to say it because I don't have a dog in a fight, and I'm not suggesting that you hire HMK company. I give them a fantastic recommendation, but that's not why I'm here. But I think that it's a really important thing, and David can outline this better than I can in terms of more of the why, but I'll give you a couple of the reasons why. One is from the very get-go, you should have gotten the Gantt chart. And it starts out as a very big picture. It's like that 30,000 foot view of these are the types of things, these are the timelines that you would expect to go through pre-bond. And then there's sort of this demarcation line, and then there's post-bond, and it goes through like that. Then you get into, and I should have brought one, I had my construction meeting this morning with one of David's project managers and Birding. And then you get a very detailed Gantt chart. We have weekly meetings now. I attend all those weekly meetings, and it's down to the day, little bubbles on each day. So you know when you're on schedule. Project manager that is your owner's representative. They do not work for the construction company. They do not work for the architecture company. And I love architects. My daughter wants to be one. But the reality is that architects will, go for the pie in the sky, and they'll look at some things, and sometimes they need to have a little bit of a check on the ground. And your general contractor can also have a different bent on things. And so having somebody that just represents the school district is huge, or the schedule. And then the biggest thing is budget. Knowing that this is the budget we have to work with. Here are the hard costs that we have, the construction costs and what you're looking for, your GMP. Here are the soft costs that we have. When we finish these spaces, do we have enough money left over for FF&E to be able to actually, now we have this new beautiful, vocational space. Do we have enough money to put tools in it? You can use bond funds for that if you wrote it in. I don't know that you did or not, but all of that goes to Ryan. What I think you're getting at is that you need to know what the budget is and look at every month, which will allow you to make those adjustments. And I can tell you, our project right now at LBL, every week I'm getting these things, and we're seeing, change orders for things that will happen because, when you dig into a 100-year-old building, the conditions that we're finding are different than anybody even could have anticipated. And so then you can respond when you have a budget. And I know that I have a contingency that, we can stay in that sort of safe zone. So that's something I'll let Frank and David add to it, but I would be totally remiss if I walked out the door at the end of the night, not giving you the advice of maybe take a pause, see if you can get a project manager to help you. I will tell you, the trade-off that you're going to have is it costs money. There's soft costs built in. You're gonna have to pay, for that, but you'll probably have a more successful project.
As a board member, as Jason pointed out, project manager works for us. He likes architects, I don't. I don't trust them. And I know the contractors are out to make money. The project manager is there to see that we get what we're paying for and that we're paying for something that we need. And not some guilt on the lily over here that the architect thinks, hey, this will really make your building great. Well, it might, but it's cost $100,000. It's not going to help the kids. And the project manager can stop the architect and say, hey, this is not what the board wants. This isn't a gild the lily type of board. This is a board that wants these things for the kids. And that really helps, because as a board member, it's kind of hard to argue with the architect who you don't really see other than comes in and shows you these big fancy pictures. But your project manager can take a beating. We've had
Absolutely.
some board members who love to chew on David. Why isn't this here? Why isn't that there? Very well.
I watched dozens of board meetings. I sat in the peanut gallery board meetings thinking, oh man, I wouldn't want to be David McCabe right now, but yeah.
But he was someone we could trust. And I think that spread to the community, that there is someone on our side who's trying to get this focused and done right, and hopefully as close to budget as possible.
And you see it in the moment of things. I know that Steve Earle, who is our project manager that works with David, just this morning was talking about how, he was riding herd on girding about something with one of their subs, and they're the easiest thing for the general contractor to do. And there's great girding's a fantastic general contractor. But honestly, the easiest thing sometimes for a general contractor is just to recommend a change order and not to beat the bushes as much. And Steve's like, no, we're going to go back and we're going to look at this. And, I don't know how much time he spent on it last week, but he had a few phone calls, a few different things, and he pushed on girding. He saved $65,000 on our project just this last week. I don't even remember all the details with it, that David, kind of heard, but that was, money that is saved just by having somebody that's just looking out for you.
I think that a budget document is critical. They touched on there's two components. There's hard costs, there's soft costs. Gives you a total budget picture. You will never get that through your accounting system. You won't. Been doing it too long. So I've developed a budget sheet that basically tracks all that. And then going back to services, why do I do it? I realized that it's very hard for you as a board to be able to extract out of your, I believe you are on Info Division, LBLs.
Yep.
Info Division,
yep.
You could never tell from one of those reports where you are. Be able to put that in a form that's presented in the same way every single month, so that you can actually see what was the original budget, what is the paid to date, what is the remaining balance, and whether the budget's been revised up and down based upon information. One of the things that I did was I hired a former business manager to be a project accountant. And so he works with school districts' business manager every month to make sure that our report is reconciled to your general ledger. And so not only is he saying that the budget is true, which business manager saying the budget is true. So when you get a report, you actually know where you're at. And that's really, really critical. It's just, and it's easy. It's a single page document. It's very easy to review and read and be able to then look at it and then ask those tough questions that board members will ask at times on things, but it's, transparency.
Yeah. It builds trust.
It builds trust, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's for our project, our $14 million project that we have going on right now, it is one of these two. And Sean at HFK, puts it together with the project manager and there are board members that ask tough questions, right, Frank?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they certainly, at times have put me through the ringer in the last year in asking tough questions about certain things. And Steve, our project manager, but that's how we stay on top of.
One of the things you need to remember is that you hired your administrators to be educators. This is a whole new world for them. And without someone helping them, without David helping Jason, he couldn't do the job he's doing because he's not a trained contractor. He's not trained in the whole business. As David was saying, you have a whole new set of books that you have to be keeping. And even in a large district like Albany, we didn't have anyone who had the experience and the knowledge to do that. And we wouldn't have gotten the reports that we did if we just relied on our own people who were, fantastic educators, but didn't have a clue what was going on in the remodel.
So can I say, I think part of our problem is our bond was only 4.3 million. It wasn't a lot of money. And so now we have the costs of all of the materials and the construction. And so we don't even have enough money to do really any or a lot of our projects, let alone put out more money for a project manager. So that's where our problem, I think is where we're heading. I don't know. I don't know what's happened in the last 3 weeks. So
No, you're not. I have some
totally-
questions about
totally-
that process,
Totally
but
see where you're at with that, and that is a tough spot.
Well, yeah, because
be in,
we
yeah.
already don't have much money and
Yeah.
then to hire somebody,
If
I
might
think
comment,
one takeaway that you could probably take away from this, and isn't necessarily that we would be suggesting that just get a project manager and a silver bullet, because it might, but take away some of the concepts that we're talking about here too. That the people that you are working with that do work for you, that you can say, look, we want to see a budget every month,
I think we've done that.
So
We
we
just
haven't
aren't
got that.
getting it.
Ever.
And so that's where, like you can get hard nosed about, like, we're not going to cut you another check until we want to see some things, and granted, there's whatever contract you have, in place, but the conversation, because some of those concepts you could probably still run with to some degree.
if I
Probably look
might
different.
make a quick comment in regards to project managers, I know they cost money. But at the same time, with all the project managers I've worked with on the construction projects I've been involved with, they've always saved their salary plus more. I can guarantee that from my experiences. Now, it doesn't mean that you get an inept project manager hired and they end up costing more money than helping. That could always be the scenario. But with the ones that I've worked with, they've all actually saved their salary plus more in the project. So just something to consider.
so a couple questions on that. I think we've had this conversation a few times about hiring a project manager, and it's been decided that not to go even to a vote on that process for the bond. So that's is what it is. Who is currently project managing for CB Construction? Who's in that role? Because
The board.
multiple times they've said they have somebody in that role.
The board, well, on their behalf,
But only
it's
on their behalf.
Yeah, and they're assigning a new superintendent to the project that works for CV. That's not the type of project manager these gentlemen
No,
are talking about. And before I got here, supposedly the board appointed Scott Marshall, the architect, as the project manager. What I understand.
So that's what I heard too, that it was COVID related, some kind of
There's a loophole.
loophole
we didn't
that they
have to go
could hire the
there.
architect as the project manager. And we had letters from project managers, companies like yours that said this project started out going the wrong direction. And how do we get out of this hole is what we need to know.
So I guess I have a few questions on hiring a project manager. So from your experience with HMK, I'm gonna kind of look at that. What is the normal timeline in hiring a project manager? I mean, what have you experienced in the past? If we pause this project today, when can we think we might have somebody in place to pick up the pieces?
So 6 weeks, but there's a couple of vehicles that you could look at. And probably need to discuss them with Jason a little bit, but there's a couple of opportunities that you might be able to do something soon. But typically it's 6 weeks because you have to.
It has to go up for an RFP process?
It does.
Yes.
It
Okay,
does,
yeah,
but
thank you.
you know, if the fee is under $100,000, then you can do a draft report.
The fee for the project manager.
Yes.
Okay, so that takes me to my next question. What's the market average? Is it usually like a percentage of the bond? Is like how you pay your project manager? Is it a agreed upon contract or is it a monthly cost? What does that usually look like?
So it's
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So it's agreed upon contract. And at the beginning of a bond, if I was to just take some averages, you're gonna be somewhere between probably 2.5, 2 3/4, and 3.25% of your bond. Is roughly
So those percentages again.
2.5.
about 2.5 to 2 3/4 is the 3.25% is roughly what that of the total bond that they're managing. And that's from concept to completion. That's
That's the
roughly
whole timeline. And much of the timeline you've already gone through.
right.
Right.
So, you know, it would be less than that. No one that I know develops a fee based upon a percent. What they do is they develop it based on the hours that they believe it's gonna take to manage it. And so then they put hours to it and a dollar amount per hour, and then that becomes the fixed fee agreement. Okay, but if you were to say a range, that's roughly the range that it falls within.
And then how much, so, okay, so if you look at hiring a project manager, you're looking at, we'll just go with maximum. So you look at 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. Having a project manager come in mid-cycle this way, what does that look like time-wise and work-wise to be able to get ready to restart that project? Is that another 6 weeks? Is that, you know, what does that usually look like? Or
Well,
do you know?
It's unusual, I'll just say that, okay? But, you know, you would want to choose a project manager that's gonna come in and roll up their sleeves with humility and build a collaborative relationship with the stakeholders, the people who've already been chosen, Scott Marshall and the contractor. And just sit down and just start working through it. Where are we? You know, where are we at budget wise? Where are we at schedule wise? Where are we at scope wise? And start working through the projects and put together a plan that you can then implement is what we need to happen. So you've got people established, and so you've got to come in and you've got to want to work with them.
Yeah.
You want to take the good work that they've already done, and you want to come and be able to propel that forward to get it done. You don't want to restart everything. And so the project manager, humility is a big piece that you're going to need. If they're going to come in and just try to implode everything, you guys are going to be in bad shape. But you know, you can do that. You can do that. You know, I've had enough calls with Scott. You know, he's a good guy, and he's done this work. You just need to understand, Scott, this is your role. CB Construction, this is your role. This is my role. Let's work together and let's move this project forward. And we don't want to be an impedance, but at the same time, we've been hired to protect the interest of the district, to look after them, to be a neutral third party. And these are the things that we need to do, and these are the things that we need you to do with us.
David, would you recommend just, as Tim said, just stop until you've got the project manager, or keep moving forward as you're in the process of hiring the manager?
I think it's going to depend on the delivery method.
And the lead time of some of the
and
items.
the lead time, yeah. It could be more costly to stop, Frank, it's a great point.
That's what's my concern.
Yeah, much more expensive to stop or keep going, you know.
I think what's hard, and I'm just seeing this from the outside, much like a community member is, I'm not seeing the inner workings of a company, of either the construction or the architect. But there's nothing getting done. And that is what the
Like
community,
they basically, it appears. that
it
they just
appears,
paused
it
and-
appears like
yeah.
when you, there hasn't been work done after we've done. So that's what our
Well-
community sees also. And go ahead.
That's not totally true. They tried to keep the project going forward and getting subs here and starting on projects without us seeing the bottom dollar for these projects.
Oh, They didn't have a
So-
solid budget set.
So they were gonna do concrete this week or next week, and we had no budget. We still don't have budget for the earthwork that they've done. So we put a stop to it.
That's fair. That's a good,
So
thank
you're
you.
a CMGC contract, I know that. You should have a GMP.
Keep in mind that the board never voted to stop the project. That was never a board vote.
We
did-
suggested, well, we told them that we don't want to pour concrete.
We
But
told them
that
that
was the board vote.
the board vote was that they gave us the priorities like we had asked for in the August 1st meeting.
Correct.
So we did
Correct.
pause them essentially and said, you can't do anything until you get us what we had voted on August 1st, because that has yet to be delivered.
So yes, so sorry, the wording was
Do you have a
different.
Do you have a GMP?
That's the problem is
There's no,
We've
there's no
asked.
document at all.
we've asked
No.
for these documents since the 1st of August and we still don't have anything.
But it sounds like we need a GMP in place to really
Yeah.
push that.
Yes.
That's the contract, there's a guaranteed maximum price.
Yep.
So
We don't-
that's what authorizes them to do any work.
Yeah, they haven't given us that and we've asked, and they said, oh, we'll have it by Thursday, we'll have it by next Friday, we'll have it by, and we've never gotten it.
You, in my mind, I mean, there could be all kinds of reasons, and Scott and CB aren't here to be able to explain this to it. But I could never see moving forward without a GMP. You've got to know what the cost
Mhm.
is. What are you committing to? How does this impact your budget?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to make a decision. I say this, Jason and Frank have heard me say this way too many times. Every single decision you make, whether it's on scope, has a cost impact.
Mhm,
And you've got to be looking at both always,
mhm.
because you could have the best project designed, but you can't afford it. What good is that done you? So we've got to, it's a constant balancing act for you to be able to make those decisions. Yes, this is what we want. Yes, this is the cost. And yes, it's within budget. And now let's proceed.
Otherwise, it's the shiny new car that sits on the car lot. You don't need to drive,
So and I think
you know, that because if you don't have to put it together.
to that point where we talked about priorities and GMPs and wanting to see those numbers, and we talk about an HVAC system not being, the prettiest thing. I think I will speak for myself. I come from a place of fear when we are so focused and so heavily focused on the prettiest thing, but we know the HVAC system that we have or the heating system, cooling system we have has shut our school down, and our kids cannot be educated in that situation. That is the prettiest thing to the community right now. And I know it doesn't seem
Sometimes-
like it is, but
Yeah,
having our kids in here
Safe,
sweating right now,
Warm and dry.
Yes.
having our
safe.
kids in here sweating,
Yep.
they can't learn that way.
Right.
Knowing that in 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, they're gonna be cold.
Cold.
Yeah.
And I respectfully would disagree, because I would say our community does think that that's one of the prettiest
they?
things
Okay.
that
Well,
we
that's-
should, and I
Yeah.
think that that's a
Great.
good thing, but
Yeah,
We-
that's a
we want
super good thing.
infrastructure.
If
But I
you-
would-
if
I would
you
say
have that, That's huge.
I
So-
would say we have the backing 100% from the community.
Good.
That is probably the heaviest hitter on what passed this
Okay.
bond.
Yeah.
more
Well,
than
that-
anything
So that's
else.
really good to know, and that's something that
I would feel that way speaking
Yeah,
for
we know, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I wouldn't know, the background. And there are communities that absolutely pass bonds because of it. The first bond that I was involved in, gosh, it was almost 20 years ago now when it was, put together. Yeah, 2007, yeah, 2007, in Albany, was passed on those three words: safe, warm, and dry. I can tell you that the school district, now I was superintendent, we convinced the voters to pass that bond based on the same sorts of things, so I think if that's a priority, then you can, wrap around it. Let me ask you this, do you know where you're at with your ESSER money expenditure?
Yes, we're gonna apply our ESSER funds to the HVAC system.
Okay, so you have, so how much?
It's
left
around
do you have?
300,000.
You have about 300,000 left, okay.
Yes, it's three,
ESSER 3.
ESSER 3,
so 24,
Pardon me?
August 24. Has
Yes.
to be spent.
Yes.
Yep.
So
Okay, so that was one of the questions Frank and I, when we were driving out, we talked about that, is that make sure that you have ESSER money that can go towards HVAC. We're
Yes.
spending, ESD didn't get as much ESSER money as, ESD don't get as much ESSER money the way it worked out as school districts, but absolutely, that should go towards it.
Air quality.
Yeah, that's not putting your bond budget.
Right.
And I have some very, very strong opinions that are now going to come out about HVAC systems and school districts. I work for, Helix, or Helixes. I did 2 bonds for Helix, where I own it. So I'm working for Black Butte School District. So one of the things that I've learned is you don't want to pay somebody from Portland to come down here and fix your HVAC system every single time. So we've got to, the HVAC system needs to be designed so it's maintainable. And it's also durable. It's got to be easy. If there's a problem, Sean should be able to look at the thermostat and be able to diagnose it pretty quick, or potentially call a local person that does residential and light commercial to come repair it. So I've successfully done these hundreds of times, but we need to make sure that the HVAC system is going to be one that will be easy to maintain, is durable, will work,
That is locally,
and it's going
that's
to be
locally
locally
backed.
back. Either somebody from Walport or from Corvallis can be here within 30 minutes to be able to work. Those are things that we have to take into consideration in the HVAC system.
And receive to your point, that's where you want to go. When you talk about school getting closed because of HVAC problems, what you want, and as a former superintendent of a small school district, what I wanted is, I don't want to do a school closure. I'll do a school delay. I'll go 2-hour delay, but I want to be able to, to what David's talking about, get somebody out so that we're just talking about a delay. It's cold out, but we're going to get the building warm. So kids can be in at 10 instead of 8.
I think that we probably could look at that after we get this upgrade, but we've got an ancient boiler that it just all of a sudden decides not to work, and there's no
Yeah.
fixing it right now.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. This gets into the weeds a little bit, but has Scott, the architect, already designed the HVAC system?
Mhm.
Okay. So there's already a design.
Yes.
Have there been, has it been out to bid yet?
We haven't seen.
We haven't seen it.
I know they're working on, they've been trying to attract a mechanical contract for quite some time.
Okay.
And they're coming up short. I
So,
don't know
so
if
that's one of your high priorities. That might be an area where, even looking at, and David, correct me if I'm stuck with suggesting this, but where you might want to look at hiring a project manager, even just a project manager, like if you were to piecemeal say, okay, I want a project manager, that is your most important thing, to take a look at what that plan is through a lens like David's looking at, because if that plan that was designed by an architect that I think is in California, Idaho, design, that may not know the local market and things like that, it might be designed in such a way that it won't, sort of pass the local sniff test, and be able to look at. And so have somebody critically look at what the design is, make adjustments to the design, and that might actually attract a different set of bids. The design might be sort of outpacing what bidders are even willing to do, to put in that, I don't remember exactly how many bids. We're doing kind of a wholesale HVAC upgrade at BSD, reusing a number of the rooftop units and whatnot, but there were multiple bids for that project. And so, and they're all over.
So we're not getting any bids from anybody.
Yeah.
local.
So it might be, and this is where I don't have the expertise, but it might be that it's the design that's keeping them from bidding.
Oh,
Is that like out of step, David?
No, it could be the design and also, one of the things that I found, especially when you have general contractors that don't have a big presence in the local area, they sometimes have to work harder to recruit subcontractors. I mean, they actually have to go spend time with them and they need to, in essence, sell themselves that they're a contractor that the sub wants to work. And, I don't know, I just recently had a problem like this in Southern Oregon, with Ashland High School. And the contractor was out of the area. And we only got one HVAC bid, and it was far more than it should have been. And one of the things we realized is they probably didn't do a good enough job selling themselves and building rapport and building relationship. And again, I don't know what CB's done, but I do realize when you bring contractors in from outside, there's more work that needs to be done to attract local subcontractors. And that would be a question I would ask them. What did you do to attract local contractors to bid this project? Did you go sit down and meet with them? Did you go through the drawings with them? Did you talk about your contract and your terms and the way you're going to work with them? Did you go through all that and try to build relationship with them? If not, then maybe that's something that they should be doing. So these projects
Yeah.
are successful.
It's amazing what the local contractors will do. I think about all of the phone calls I've heard about the girding. They just their virtual Rolodex is very thick. They're able to pick up the phone and say, all right, we only got one bid on such and such. Are you sure you don't want it? Come on. Basically it's that conversation. Take a look at this again. Come to our office and look at the plans again. We'll explain this.
I have a question on the HVAC system. You can see where my heart lies.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the sniff test and having it. So how, sitting behind this table without a project manager right now, because that's the position that we're in. How do we ask for that to be locally? Like, we really want to see, have you ran it by a local company out here? Is that just a directive that we give to the contractor
Yeah.
that says,
They
okay,
work for you.
before you even say yes to an RFP because you've gone out to a subcontractor, we want the sign off from a local repair, local service that they would
You
repair
absolutely,
this.
that construction company works for you. I mean, you can absolutely direct them. We want you to get in touch with, solicit bids. They can go out and shake the tree.
One-
Now, you can't force them.
You can't,
to
yeah, can't.
hire local because it has to be competitive.
Yep.
But you
No.
can say, we want you to look at a ballpark, which is what, 38 miles from here,
40, yeah.
right? 40 miles. And we want you to look in Corvallis, Paloma.
Yeah.
And within that circle, there's probably 6 or 7 good HVAC contractors that do residential like commercial.
And you go another 10 miles to Albany and you're going to add another 6 or 7. And so you absolutely can direct them to say, we want to see documentation of your outreach
Well, and
to, a list of local companies
I
that
think my question
bid
kind
on this.
of goes even a little bit further than that of, we've designed an HVAC system. Maybe you didn't hire locally because the RFP really was better with someone who installed this elsewhere. But now are we in a boat that we don't have somebody locally that can repair it or maintain it? And that's where
That's what David's talking about.
I think that's part of my fear,
Yes,
again,
exactly.
that it's fine, it's great to have people come in and do this, but back to the maintenance of it, if we don't have people to
Yeah.
maintain it, then.
And that's exactly where David was going with this, is that, you know, your best circumstance is to have one of your metrics for hiring somebody be that it can be worked on locally. And it's simple, you know, that there are plenty of times when, I mean, I look at the first, or I first kind of, you know, got a little bit of experience doing some of this type of work was opening a new school. And I was the building principal and, you know, went through the whole pre-bond process with board members and administrators and all of that. And that particular school was right at a time, it was 2008, 2009. And it was right at a time when everything was going very electronic. And so the controls for the actual HVAC system itself was pretty simple. It's mechanical, except that the controls were, you know, a little bit more cutting edge. And I can tell you that, I don't know, I mean, David probably saw the tail end of it later. It was like 2 years of working on getting the controls dialed in. And so you want to, my opinion, this is just my opinion about it, I would much rather have a simple system. It's the same thing with even, you know, like, I'll use an example of lighting. You know, you look at a room like this that has, if you have windows on one side of the room and you start thinking about, okay, well, what's the most simple thing? Well, the most simple thing is to have banks of lights that are parallel to the windows and put multiple switches on the walls where you can turn off a bank of lights at a time. So that if you have a lot of natural light coming in, you can save energy by turning off the bank of lights nearest the windows. I would rather have manual controls and teach people how to use them than to have, you know, some other sort of fancy thing. And that's where, you know, you can direct that, you can ask for that. So that, like, hey, we want a system, like David had said, that can be repaired by a residential or light industrial HVAC company. That's a metric.
And Albany made the mistake, the building that Jason's in, with going with that fancy system. And for the 2 years, the board said, well, is it dialed in yet? Well, we're working on it. And you kind of wonder, you know, after 6 months, okay, this should be done. And then all of a sudden it's, well, we're working on it, but it's the middle of summer. And the problems with the heating, well, you're not working on the heating system in July.
Right.
So, you know, those type of things, you know, can get really agitate a board.
And those were lessons when I look at in that bond that I'm willing to bet, even though I didn't track all of the construction side of the next bond, the really big bond that, you know, David managed, that didn't happen in that same way. You know, that was a particular thing for that building, that the board that Frank was a part of at the time, like, we are not going to have a super complicated system because we remember what happened with Timber Ridge. And you know, so there was a different metric. And David's philosophy about HVAC really shone through.
So maybe Ristine, that's a question for our architect. Is it a complicated system or is it a very basic manual system that we need?
I think so. I also took away, I was looking for this phrase and I'm glad you said it, but the metrics for hiring. So I think that it would be important for the board to understand what are some of the metrics that they're using to hire? What are they looking at in that RFP process? We need to know that.
Well, and
If we don't agree with them, we need to have that conversation to adjust them.
And what is the system that they're trying to build? I mean, what is the specs of it? Is it above and beyond what our local people do? I mean, are they, you know, designing it for New York or are they designing it for LC?
Yeah,
So
and that's where
maybe-
you can start looking at, maybe it is a design thing that's
Yeah.
keeping people from bidding on it. you know?
Yeah.
But
Well,
the
that's
the
what I
general
think.
contractor, they can take that design out and talk to local companies, HVAC companies and say, take a look at this, what, you know, you haven't bid on this.
And why?
Maybe they haven't seen it, why? Yeah,
Well, I think that's a good I think it's important too to note, I don't know that we're bidding locally or opening it out to bid locally. I don't know the answer to that. They could, it could very well be the case. But I think that's something that we need from them.
Need to ask.
We need them to give them.
Yes.
What sort of outreach? The question I would ask is, tell us about the outreach that you've done to local subcontractors.
And that, it works. I forget which South Albany bid it was, that we only had one bid on. And that was way high because the contractor, subcontractor knew that they were the only one bidding. And if you know you're the only one bidding, there's no end to zeros.
Right.
So we had to turn it down and went back, and I think David worked on that one, but South Albany one.
Supplemental school.
And I don't know how much time we put into it, but the next time around, we got 3 bids and a lot better price. Of course, we've also turned down the bid and gotten higher prices too.
Yes.
But it is the advantage of CFGC that you can go out.
Can you talk about that a little bit further?
Actually, I'm gonna defer the technical side of CMGC to Dave. I can explain it, but you're gonna get the Jason Hay, like, educator.
Oh, okay,
Version, but
we'll go
yeah.
Dave first.
Yeah, let's have him say it.
So the CMGC process, the CMGC's competitively selected. They then publicly advertise for all the various bid packages, so HVAC, electrical, framing, concrete, all those are packages that there's a specific scope of work that they put out to the subcontractors that bid. If you receive only one bid or no bids, you can then tell your CMGC you need them to go out and solicit additional bids for that bid. Jason was talking about his project. There were a number of bid packages that we only received one bid.
Mhm.
And we went to Gertie and said, no, we're not going to accept just one bid. Now, it may end up being the best value, but we need you to go out and get us a couple more bids, because when we make a decision, we need to determine what is the best value. That doesn't mean it's the least expensive, but it's the best value for them, whether it's HVAC or concrete or framing or windows or doors, or any of that. So the CMGC process allows you to do that ethically. Okay, so you cannot tell anybody what that one bid was, but you can go out to the market and say, go see 2 or 3 other HVAC contractors and say, we'd like you to bid this. Jason mentioned that, Girding went out and they asked bids, we need you to bid this. So that's one thing that the CMGC delivery method allows you to do. And in this type of market, it is probably the best delivery method because it allows you to determine what best value is.
And you have that now, so there's no reason why you can't.
And I think it's
Trust
important to
them.
notate that the best value is determined by your RFP. It's the
Yes.
parameters you put in that
Yes.
RFP. It's not always just the lowest cost.
Exactly.
And that's the advantage of this process. You can say, okay, yeah, we're looking for value here, but we're also looking for these other qualities.
Absolutely. And your HVAC example is a perfect one, is that if you have the choice between, somebody that's gonna charge $50,000 less for a system that is, put in by a California company or whatever, that, you're gonna have to wait 48 hours to get fixed, or somebody that's Corvallis that's gonna put it in and it's gonna cost 50 grand more, pay the 50 grand more and have the local company install it and be able to service it.
Another thing, when you get your GMP delivered to you, it needs to be itemized. All of your bid packages, they need to itemize what all the bid packages are. They need to give you copies of every bid that they receive for every one of those bid packages. And they need to make a recommendation, provide a rationale for the one that they're recommending to you to accept as a piece of the overall GMP. And that's part of the transparency of the CMGC process that, is so important. And so I would say this, and I know they're listening, but I would make a demand of them that they do provide you that level of detail. It's any CMGC I've ever worked with does that. It's just the way we do schools, CMGC. and I'm sure they do it too, but you do need to see that. And then just the rationale for why they're recommending, the window supplier, or why they're recommending the concrete supplier in subcontracting.
Dave, can you take a second to maybe go through the process to create a GMP? I think that might be a good point of clarification for the board, so they understand what does that process look like from the contractors.
Right. So the drawings are 100% complete for whatever that scope of project that is being bid. Okay. I'm going to use the VOTEC building. I know you're not doing it, but the VOTEC building, because it'd be a standalone building. So that building would be designed 100%. It would be, foundations, the structure, all the interior finishes, all the electrical, all the plumbing, all the HVAC, everything complete to give you a complete building. That is the bid package. The contractor takes that and they break it up into all the various trade bids. And they basically put a scope of work together for every single one of those. We call it divisions. There's 33 divisions in that a specification book is broken into. So, and they would then, so the earthwork contractor for footings and foundations, there would be a scope that they would be required to do. Electrical, there would be a scope that would be, they would define what they were supposed to do. And then that is nowadays is put out through an electronic bid bulletin board. Subcontractors look at it, they put a bid together, they submit a bid to the general contractor. There's a hard close date and time, just like on a hard bid job. The general contractor goes through all of those various trade bids and material supplier bids, and they categorize them and they determine what they believe to be the best value for every one of those bid packages. I mean, it's not uncommon to see, somewhere between 25 and 40 different bid packages for a project. And that's the hard work that the CMGC does for it. And they make sure that there's no holes, because people exclude things. And then they try to figure out a way to fill those exclusions. And then they come to you and they have it listed out, every one of those divisions and what the cost is, who the contractor is, and whether, and then a total project. So in a simple term, that's what the CMGC
But the GM,
does.
but the GMP can't be set until the board selects which subcontract, because it's a total value.
Yes.
And so it's kind of all one and the same. They bring you the package, there's decisions that have to be made, and then the GMP can be set based upon those decisions.
Based on all sorts of estimates or estimates put it together.
Right.
You might not have another aspect to it. And this is the case with our project currently, where when Girding put together, their overall estimate, we ended up having an independent estimator and Girding do an estimate so that we could cross-reference those two estimates to get the tightest estimate we thought we could. Before we even, this was to put together the GMP, before we even put anything out to bid, there might be line items where, they're getting information from some subs that they know to be able to, like, what do you think this amount is going to be? And then there's going to be some things where it's like, well, we didn't talk to a sub, but we are making our best guess based on our experience of what sort of allowance might be for that particular thing. So that's built in, so that they also have some allowances for things that they don't necessarily have, all of the information, right up front to be able to figure out what that GMP is. And you have contingency built in and everything else, so that you have every reasonable expectation that if your scope is still within the GMP and the cost, that you can actually do the project.
Typically, the recommendation of the CMGC for the bid, the trade bid, the scope bid is accepted. At times, there's some movement. But they would come with that entire list. They would have a total GMP, and then you would go through it and see if you concur with all of their recommendations. So it's not as iterative of a process, Sean. smooth
Yes.
over a matter of a couple days.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page in terms of how that's created.
But I think this,
Processes.
it's the 1, 2, 3, your fourth asterisk bullet here in the list that you had sent us. You absolutely need to do that. I mean, so you've done the pause, you paused the project. You know, and I wouldn't move forward one iota until you know what that GMP is,
Yeah, it's,
you know. I mean,
I frankly, a contractor working is at risk unless you've authorized him to start work. And
and the district's at risk.
the district's at
or
risk too.
not
It's-
knowing
it's
what
messy.
could happen.
I'm not sure if you know what's going on right now, but we're a little risk adverse. I'm just gonna say that.
Which is
Risky,
what-
and I have not met a school district that is not risky.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what we, you know, why a lot of these things that we're talking about are so important is that it mitigates the risk, you know, that there's plenty of things that, you know, you don't know when you're doing renovations or when you're doing things to older buildings, but you know, you do everything that you can so that you mitigate the risk and you're able to be comfortable as you go out and talk with your constituents.
So Jason, just as a comparison, you guys have a project going on with the ESD.
Yep.
And the ESD is just like the school district here. And you have hired a contractor who is
Girding,
Girding.
Yep.
And you have an architect who is,
GLAS Architects out of UT,
and you have a project manager who is,
HMK company. Yep, and I will tell you that the order when, so Tanya Everest, our superintendent, I'm going into my third year with the ESD. One of the reasons why she hired me is that I have some experience in doing construction things. And she let me know from the get-go, this is something that the district has talked about for quite some time. The board had done a great job of saving money little by little over many, many years, right, Frank?
Yep.
Had built up quite a capital improvement project fund. We also knew that money was really cheap. So we don't have a general obligation bond that was approved by voters. We just went out and got a bond like you would, you know, like a mortgage. And the rate was like 1.2% or something, just crazy low, you know. And so we did that. We put together, you know, what we thought was a certain amount of money, and it was sort of this iterative process of what kind of money can we put together, what do we want to do for scope. But before we have done anything, the first very thing that I did, we talked conceptually about this, is that Tanya, our superintendent, said, Jason, I want you to work on writing an RFP to hire an owner's rep project manager. So the very first hire that I worked on was to hire HMK company. After I hired HMK company, then David and his project manager, Steve, helped me write the RFP. And it's like me write the RFP. Really, they wrote the RFP, but I was the owner's rep, basically, representing the organization as the administrator. And we put an RFP out to hire an architecture firm. We hired GLS Architects. And we had the design process. We put together a design, got to 100% drawings, estimates, all of that, you know, and then from there we hired Girding. And that went through an iterative process to create the GMP. And we just started construction in June after, I don't know, I guess, 18 months? Yeah, it was 18 months. So,
when did you have your GMP available to you? What point?
gosh, I have to go back and look at the minutes, but I will say, yeah, we had two, because we did a GMP at 90%, right?
Solicitation in April,
Yeah,
which was to be able to get all the long lead items.
yep. So there was April and then there was one in May,
May,
or
June.
May, June, end of May.
And
I
this
think
is
our board meeting was on like June 8th or something. is
Yeah,
when
so
the
it's
board
May.
approved it, yeah.
And you started construction at what date?
Oh, we started construction the week after that final GMP. So
So-
the board approved the GMP. I want to say, I'd have to look at my calendar, but I think it was June 8th. And I want to say we started construction like 2 days.
That
brings up-
Yeah.
Girding
Started
was,
asbestos
yeah,
abatement.
we started asbestos abatement,
It's
yes,
just big, it's like-
asbestos abatement. And so actually, we had started asbestos abatement 3 months prior. We actually vacated the building in February. But the asbestos abatement was actually a contract that HMK secured for us to do outside of the GMP so that we could do the abatement. Because we got it, the building. We'll invite all of you when it's all done, but the building got completely gutted. And so we needed to do that first before the construction could happen. But yeah, the board voted on that. They voted on GMP in April. I was thinking, but you're right, it's April. It was March. We put things together. They voted in April on the early lead items. I want to say it was about 480, 700,000, something like that. We bought HVAC stuff, windows, storefront and doors and hardware. Yeah. Yeah. And so the board voted on that. Board voted in June, on June 8th, and I think on June 10th, Girding was in there putting fencing up. And by, I don't know, 2 days after that, once the fencing went up, they were ripping the walls out.
So one thing I want you to address is the financing piece, because I think it's important that we take a look at that. Because, yeah, you didn't go out for go bond.
Yep.
You know, you do the diligence of the board over a long period of time. They saved up enough in the capital funds account.
Yep.
But I'm sure it wasn't 100% to fund this project, because you had to go out for a mortgage.
Yes, we did.
Okay,
So
so tell
we
us about
actually-
that process.
Oh, that process was a whole nother, I had 4 months. I was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a full faith and credit thing. So it was 4 or 5 months. And we secured $7 million. So half of the money that we're spending on the project was through a loan, or basically a loan. And the other half was funds that. So,
And part of our justification for it is this is work that we're gonna have to do. So this, instead of piecemealing the HVAC and the ceilings and all this together, do it now and figure that we'll spend $100,000 a year less and for the next 10 years to pay for it. One thing Jason forgot to mention, as he glibly went through how this process went, was, well, we're $3 million over budget, so we're recommending that we don't do anything on the conference center.
it's true. We did
Yeah.
make a major cut to scope.
And we're not going to do this part of this project, and we're not going to do that. So it wasn't just, hey, we got it. And there's a lot of, well, is this worth what we have? And it is what we have working. So
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Frank. And that was a whole nother part that I just glossed over is that, we had a superintendent work group that we put agendas together for 9 months. Board updates at every board meeting, which probably have been the major item for quite a few months. To, have the board be supportive and think about, all right, this is what we want to do.
and 3 of the board members were part of that committee.
And your board is 7?
So,
Yeah.
Yep.
That's why we had to stop at 3.
So from a board perspective, I mean, Jason has given his perspective on this, but from the board perspective, as you went through this whole process, talk about some of the challenges that you had. And concerns, consternations, anxieties, successes.
There's been some of that.
I think, yeah, one of the biggest ones was the fact that most board members don't deal in $5, $6, $7 million projects. As the board chair told me one time, I don't know how to spend this kind of money. Because, for him, a major remodel was, $3,000. And we're looking at, $7 to $14 million. So that was probably one of the biggest ones, the sticker shock. And the fact that, when we put together what we wanted to do and came back, we can't do that even with what we're spending. think another is, even though the board was kept abreast of everything that was going on, they felt that they didn't have anything to do with it. Because with inflation, things just aren't going to go, we don't want to do that. Well, tough. You just have to accept the fact that, we've got 9% inflation, and electrical equipment we have to buy now to install a year from now. And the uncertainty of it made some board members really nervous. But most of them accepted the fact that, we had professionals who were doing this. We had, David, telling us why this happened, and why you can't do that. And, and Jason also coming in and saying, well, we would like to have redone the conference center, but, something else would have had to have gone. And we had a lot of things that needed to be done. And when they started work on the building, we found out we had more things that needed to be done. When you have a brick building that has gaps between the layers of brick, it's kind of scary to look at that.
And there's things that, kind of, that something was said earlier that we've seen in our project is that you do get presented with opportunities as well. So, Frank talked about part of the process was to talk through the idea that we're going to spend money now to not spend money later. And so, like, one example of that the board gave a nod to this last month is we're going to spend another, I think it's like $160,000, $165,000 putting sheeting on the roof, because we need to do a new roof. And if we're going to put a new roof on the building, and we're moving all these HVAC units around to put a new roof on the building, we might as well sheet it, because that'll make it more seismically sound. Well, that's $160,000 ad. When you start adding up 160 here and 50 there and 40 over there, it starts turning into some real money, and starts making you nervous. But the board was like, no, this makes sense. This is an opportunity, because if we waited and we wanted to do this later, then we're going to have to be replacing a roof or tearing a roof off, moving HVAC units. It's not going to cost us 160. It's going to cost us 500 or whatever. So those were opportunities that we kind of looked at through this old building. How can we sort of future-proof things to some degree?
I think you started to say something, right? It went a different direction. Did you?
So timing, we got till 2024, first part of 2024. And we've got not much to show for anything. And we lose the match grant, right?
For sure, the match grant, we might be able to extend bond through with ample
Stuff.
rationale, which I do believe we have, but we'd have to go through the process. That's not
So
guaranteed.
we're kind of close on time.
I see David just put his pen out.
Yeah.
So,
So I think it's like March or April, May for each of them.
Yeah.
so your ESSER's August 24th.
Right.
And that was 300K, right?
Esser's August 24.
If it's ESSER 3.
If it's the matching grant, awesome grant.
Awesome, yeah.
Awesome grant. I think that is March of 2024, and
Yeah.
then the bond is
April,
of
I
20.
think.
They're like a month apart.
Well, so the bond is you have to have a reasonable expectation at the date of the sale of the bond that you will expend 85% of the money within 36 months.
Correct.
Okay, this is the IRS code, a reasonable expectation.
Correct.
Okay. If you're not able to, then you put a rationale why you weren't able to in the file. So that one, I'm
Yeah.
not worried about, just so you know. I'm not worried about that one for you.
Correct.
Okay? Because
All
I
I'm saying
think
is not guaranteed.
it is guaranteed.
From us talking to the state, they said it's not guaranteed. We would have to go through the process.
Given the circumstances that have happened here, I would totally agree with David. I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
I think you could put a rationale together.
You put a rationale, yeah, I'm having to face this.
Okay.
The match, March of 24, you just have, and that's 1.2.
something.
Yeah,
It's half, I think, almost.
So don't we, so by doing the vote center, doesn't that money go into the vote center?
Well, it can, but well, that's where we need funds to see where we can go. You know what I mean? We
Well,
have
because we
no
can-
funds because we don't know what our budget is. So we could spend this money potentially if we had a budget and we could use that first.
Yes.
But
Right,
if
that
we
was
know
my-
what the HVAC and the electrical are, we can, that's in budget, then we could go right to the Vogue building or, you know.
Right.
But I mean, you guys obviously have brought design to a point where the contractor's going out to bid.
yes.
So we are September of 22. I mean, it just seems unrealistic that you could not spend this money by March of 24.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we could spend it pretty easily if we
I think
actually
that we
move
would
it.
At your
agree with
major
you.
construction window next summer.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you get it done.
I think we would agree with you. I think what I tend to see is we get into these loops, right? So I feel like this has been a constant loop of
Mhm.
we're trying to get budgets and Gantt charts and funds and things like that. And so with every month, so we moved our board meetings to every 2 weeks because we knew we needed to make decisions. And with every board meeting that passes, that we don't get that information to give those go-aheads to, then that's where I think, I'm glad we're having these conversations now where there's not a lot of risk and we can still spend that money. But you're giving us some
Time's
really,
ticking.
yes. it
Time,
feels-
that's
it's
where
like
we're trying
We
to.
only have so much more
There's
time
an
to make those
urgency that's
decisions.
there. I
There's
think it's
urgency.
important- It's an important thing that Brian's bringing up is that there is a sense of urgency that needs to
Mhm.
be happening.
So one of the other things is that you are looking ahead to your next bond. If we don't succeed in any way in this, there's not much of a chance we'll ever get another bond
Absolutely.
because we've never had a bond before.
We have, it's been about 30,
it's been
it's been about, I want to say 40 years almost.
Okay, so.
You've never had a bond before, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In,
yeah,
in people's memories, yeah, you're
yeah,
right.
it feels like that.
But, you know, I think where you're going on it is really important. Like we talked about the communication. If, even though things have been hard thus far, I have every reason to believe that if you go through and you do the work and you pull this out, even if it's different than you started with, and you're transparent about it, and you lay it out for the community, and you talk about it, you get the good word out, and you also let them know what the challenges are and what things look like, you're gonna build trust in the community that you could pass it. You know, and the second bond, so if we look at this as the first bond, the second bond is always easier to pass. Because if you go out for the second bond and you ask for the same amount of money, basically per thousand, and you keep taxes exactly where they're at, it's like, hey, look, we can do all of these things for our school. This is what we can do, and your taxes have no change. That's a totally different set than what you did so far. So, you know, it's possible to come out of this and still have it, you know, turn out really well. And be able to queue yourself up for the next one.
And if you can say, we never canceled school because the heating system was off. That is big. Parents
yeah.
recognize, okay, my kid was never sent home because we had no heat. And that, you
A
know,
lot of those days.
that as a
So they have
parent,
to scramble to figure out childcare. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard
So
stuff.
with that question, if we get a project manager, you think the time is still okay? We hire a project manager now.
Well, Ryan, I'm making some big assumptions, and the assumption I'm making is that the drawings are developed to be able to go out to bid. And I would think that the projects that I understand that you're doing, a year and a half to implement those should be more than enough time with projects ready to bid today. So that recognize I'm
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand that. I
You
think
know,
we have
if
the
you
Vogue
was-
building, but I don't think we have the other drawings.
So I know
well, the
that
problem.
We do.
The problem.
Are we gonna
what type of
see them?
building- What type of building
can
is
see
your
them, okay.
VOTEC building?
Pardon me?
Is your VOTEC building a pre-engineered metal building?
No.
Because I just did one, doing one for Dayton, and it's 12 months to get the building.
Right.
So that's good.
Yeah, we were going to originally, but we changed it because of the material problem.
So I think, so what I'm hearing is, so so in your conversations with Scott and CB, the drawings are done and they're ready to go out to bid.
They've been going out to bid for quite some time.
But
And
the last board meeting, we did not have POC drawings or electrical drawings. yet.
We have the drawings. If that's what you guys want to look at, we certainly can.
He said they weren't finished for the,
Well,
HVAC.
according to the changes that the board has asked.
we didn't do a HVAC change. but
We haven't seen.
We haven't seen an HVAC at all, and we haven't done any changes on it.
So it sounds like we need to be sharing those with you, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
Yes.
then, and that being said, I think, yes, they've gone out for bid, but they have not gone out for bid with anybody local. They haven't
That I-
done any.
They have,
It sounds like you don't know that for sure.
Well, so what
Yeah,
what I
maybe.
know is when we asked the question of who have you spoken with locally,
Oh,
there,
you did get a
there
response
was
about
no
that.
answer of who has been spoken with locally. It's all subcontractors are like this, and that's fine, but the question was, so I think those are, so I would like people to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable both in this seat and that seat of answering those hard questions, so
I
we can
agree.
make a plan moving forward.
I agree. It's a good way of putting it.
Absolutely. And let me just say this. Often people will avoid the elephant in the room. Don't avoid the elephant in the room.
Mhm.
Don't. I'm just telling you that right now. Bad news doesn't get better with time. And so, you know, I would just say this, that just be empowered to ask the tough questions. And if you are concerned about something, if something's waking you up in the middle of the night, write it down and ask. Nobody should get offended about asking those questions, and there is no dumb question. There just isn't. And ask those questions. As you said, Christine, people need to get comfortable with asking the tough questions, and they do, and that's where you're at. And that's part of what Frank was saying, that, you know, they did with me at Greater Albany Public Schools. They would ask the tough questions, and they would expect me to be able to answer. If I couldn't answer them, I could come back the next week and give them an answer if I didn't have an answer. But yes,
And the important thing is don't ask once. If you ask once and you don't get an answer, ask again. And ask more frequently. The longer it takes, you just gotta keep after them.
You guys heard it
Eventually,
from
they'll recognize
Well, and I
that.
think we've done that. I just don't think we're not getting the answers.
Or maybe we're not hearing it the right way. I mean, we have to take some ownership too. Maybe we're not hearing it the best way. And it is, I will just say this, it's really hard having them virtual. So it might be something that we're just,
they gotta be here.
yeah,
You gotta be here.
we need a relationship also where,
Yes.
or maybe there isn't a relationship with people externally for them. We also don't have a relationship with
Right.
Mr. Marshall or city construction. So
Unfortunately.
Okay.
Meds to do, so are we getting closer?
So I made a list of some action items.
Okay.
Not that we're voting on, but some follow-ups. So we need a communication template that the contractor and construction, that CB construction, so sorry, that Straight Line and CB construction are following to provide constant communication.
Yep.
We need to know what their relationship with the community looks like and how they're building their relationship to get those subcontract bids out there. We need to know their metrics for hiring and know them so that we can adjust if we need to. We need a budget of all the funds, so bond and ESSR, the ESSER funds, and the awesome. So we need to see all of those with expenditures. And then from there, we can start having those conversations around GMP with the itemized bid packages and recommendations as to why they're accepting certain bids. So those are the things I jotted down. I think the big elephant in the room conversation is hiring a project manager. And that's not something we can vote on, but
Well, but the conversation originally was, the bond is small and he could handle it. That's what he said. That he could handle being the project manager because the bond was so small.
Who's he?
Mark said
Yes.
that.
Oh,
Mark.
He
Mark,
said that
right?
also. He said that also in the
Well,
very beginning.
I can be a Jason. I can't be a Dave.
Yeah.
Right.
And I
There's a
think that's an
difference.
important clarification, is that while I go to the weekly construction meetings to be the liaison between what's going on in construction and our superintendent, our board, staff, and
Yes.
everything else. I don't have construction expertise, and so
Yes.
I am relying on Steve Earl, David's project manager that we work with,
Yes.
to do all of this. So I have never spoken with, so here's a good example. I have never spoken with a subcontractor at this point. I have spoken with three people from Girding and 2 people from HMK. That's who I work with.
Yeah.
So that's what you can expect Sean to do. But having somebody that would be in your court that knows, how to speak contractor,
Yeah.
that's really who you need.
Okay.
The other thing that you can do without, that you can do in a work session, so I'm just going to get into a little bit of process. You can start putting together, what a plan could be without voting on hiring anybody.
Right.
So you could work on an RFP for project manager.
Mhm.
You could start working, you could start that 6-week clock tomorrow if you want to.
I think we
Just-
have another.
just
work
by
session
saying-
Thursday.
Just by saying that, hey, this is the direction we want you to go, tell Sean, this is where we want to go. And you could start working on that.
Now, you mentioned earlier, if it's less than 100,000, it's an appointment. Can you expand more upon that? Because that's different than the 6-week process.
So in ORS 279C, it's 120, professional services, which are a qualification-based selection process. And if the contract value is under $100,000, you can direct the contract.
So it's like hiring a secretary or an architect.
It's like hiring an architect or
Yep.
So
surveyor.
you advertise the position.
No.
No,
You don't even have to advertise.
don't you have to
You
advertise?
just go to the market, people who do this, and say, we'd like you to raise the price to do this.
So that would significantly reduce that 6-week period unless
It
that's what the
could
board
be
wants
done
to
in
do.
2 weeks.
What's that again?
It could be done in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And then there's another option that I need to talk to Jason first before.
This has been really helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And I-
We want I look at, from the ESD's perspective, we serve all 12 of our school districts, and we want all of our kids to have a really good experience. And I absolutely applaud you as board members and serving your community to do this work, because buildings matter, the kids that are in it, and they change environments, and I can attest to that from my principal job of opening a new school and seeing how different it was from working in a building that was 80 years old to seeing kids in a brand new building. That changes things. So your vocational building, you will see magic having space for kids like that. And so you're doing the right thing, and we want your kids to have
And the
deserve
other,
a lot of that money.
and another factor there is we have a lot of employees who work in this district,
Yes,
You do.
and we'd like them to have the best environment to work in.
so I want to thank all 3 of you gentlemen for coming. And Dave, that's actually on vacation. He got his vacation short to come back and be with us. So that is very, very commendable. And we thank you for
Yes,
that.
thank you.
And
for
we
your
also
time.
thank you guys from the ESD. Again, you guys as the ESD have jumped up, I don't know how many times to help us in a variety of aspects of this district. So thank
That's
you.
what we're there for.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we appreciate it.
Help.
We
I
really do.
feel not so far in the dark
Good.
now.
Yes.
But that's what we want is, we want to shed light and transparency. on things. And if you can do that, then you can have the tough conversations and you can work through it.
Well, at least we're having a conversation now. A year ago, we couldn't have. one. And I just really appreciate you guys coming in, having this. do this.
And like to begin with, I've been through 3 fairly big bonds, and I'm still learning. There's still things coming up that I hadn't even considered before. So, it's just because you don't understand anything. It could be because it's not understandable, because it's an entirely different language. Whole new set of laws, working with Benton County and Lynn County.
We know all about that.
Yeah, it is really funny, like it's a
Challenge.
different language.
Have
yeah.
you had to work with the Corps of Engineers?
Mm,
Now, hope you don't.
not yet.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
well,
Thank
we
you.
will go ahead and adjourn at 2014. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot,
Okay,
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut that short. I
Yeah.
just